Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Free to Grow CFO podcast, where we dive deep into conversations with brand founders and industry experts about scaling a D2C brand with a profit-focused mindset. I'm your host, Jon Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We're an outsourced finance firm that specializes in fractional CFO and bookkeeping services for growing D2C brands. All right, today I'm here with my buddy Will Holtz. Will is a friend of mine that I've talked shop on a lot of different strategy conversations over the years off the podcast, and I'm stoked to finally have him on the podcast so that we can talk shop for our listeners here today. Today, Will serves a company called Prescient AI as VP of Strategy and Operations. He's got actually a really awesome background before that, which we're going to dive into. But Will, thanks for joining me, man. Happy to have
Thanks,
you here.
John. Yeah, it's good to be on this side of the house and not
For
doing
sure.
the actual interview.
For sure. Yeah. For those of you that don't know, Will's actually got his own podcast as well. And so it's always, I was on someone else's last week as well. And it's funny doing both now. I'm like, I actually feel like I'm becoming better at both by sitting on both sides of the conversation than when I used to just sit on as like actually just being interviewed only. Do you feel the same?
It's actually pretty weird. I feel like I don't even listen when I'm doing the actual interviewing itself until after, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that was actually an interesting conversation. You're kind of just in the moment, trying to facilitate a little bit, but no, it's fun. It's fun to do both.
For sure. It is weird because like I try to be as present as I can while I'm hosting, but you got to be thinking about keeping the flow going and looking for areas to like dive into like an interesting subtopic. But I do just truth be told to everyone listening, I do listen to the podcast afterwards always, and I actually learn a lot about myself and about my guests when I'm listening to them because I can be fully present.
Absolutely.
So look, what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk about a few different things. One, Will's got an interesting background being an operator and an aggregator, and actually co-founder of an aggregator. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then really what I want to spend most of the conversation talking about data analytics, but most specifically what I'm calling this new wave or this new mindset of attribution in the e-com world. I think a lot of people you hear a lot of talk with the vast majority of brand operators of, oh, there's pre-iOS 14 and post-iOS 14, and like that's the line they draw in the sand. Post-iOS 14, attribution sucks, you can't do it. But the reality is there's a new mindset to attribution today in 2024. There's new tech tools. Prescient AI is on the forefront of that. And so Will's background prior to Prescient and with what he's doing now over there positions him really well to talk about this topic at a deep level. And so you don't want to miss what we're talking about here. This new mindset, this new wave of attribution, you need to get exposed to it today because you're going to have to leverage it if you want to keep scaling your brand with a profit-focused mindset. So all that to say, let's dive in. Will, I want to get started though with your story, your entrepreneurial journey, and ultimately how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my journey, it's always been, I guess, from a profit first mindset because I started in finance, kind of did that traditional investment banking into private equity, and the businesses I dealt with there were anywhere from a helicopter leasing business to data centers to restaurants. So, in that sense, you have to make sure you have a good business first and foremost. And I learned, I think, the most important thing to me coming out of experience was unit economics. Does this business make sense to actually run or not when you get to a certain scale? And that's kind of the concept of the unit economics. It's been really important since then. But I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, kind of always wanted to move over to that entrepreneurial roots. And after I went to business school, I ended up, I interned one summer at a CPG startup, actually in the Bay Area called Grow Collaborative. And this was, at the time, a Series B company, kind of a fast growing company. And I just had a great experience. I mean, I had experiences. The CEO, Steve Landsberg, became kind of a mentor to me. But one of the first days that I was in the office, I was coming up with this big business plan, almost like a consulting plan to run this B2B business for them. They were mostly D2C side of the house. And he said, this is all really great, but you should just kind of scrap all your plans that you have and just go door to door and they were selling natural products, so hand soaps, for instance, like natural hand soap. So go door to door and figure out how to sell this product to offices. So I would literally go around San Francisco knocking on people's doors. I went to Allbirds' office. I went to other people's offices, said, "Hey, can I sell you this hand soap?" Basically, and it was a very humbling experience because it's you get quick feedback, but also people are like, "Well, what are you trying to? Why are you trying to sell me this?" And I learned a lot of interesting threads. And I think most importantly, it was about again, you have to put yourself out there, learn very quickly, and iterate. Which I think has been very true of like this space that we're operating in, which is you just have to constantly learn and change, even like the attribution stuff we're going to talk about today. So that actually brought me, I had a great experience when I graduated business school. I joined another CPG company called Recess, another kind of CPG darling, and I think in the space initially, CBD beverages and the like. I was about 10 people when I joined. I joined as an intern, and then I ended up becoming the chief of staff to the CEO, which was also a very interesting role, which you could maybe talk about later. But then about 8 months in, got asked to take over the e-com business. So both the D2C business and then eventually the Amazon business. And mainly because I was analyzing the business, running cohort analysis, doing spreadsheet math and saying, here's opportunity in this line of the business. And then I was asked to actually go run it. And that was probably my first exposure to this whole crazy world, that we do operate in. And I realized everyone's talking in acronyms. I didn't really know what people were talking about. We're working with an agency and they're telling me ROAS and this and that. I was like, I don't even know what this all means, but let me just go figure it out. And that's when, again, the spreadsheet, I think, magic worked then with the platforms and worked with, the new tools that were out there. And the first thing I noticed is that there weren't a lot of tools that are aggregating data together, to make it easy for you to actually make decisions across platforms. And so I looked for about 5 to 6 months for a tool that would actually help me do that. And I was just coming up blank. And so I was meeting startups at the time. They were trying to figure it out. There's one called Polyops at the time. It was a YC company and it turned into Tyto, and then I met the company called Source Medium, which I became one of the first customers of. Really liked what the business value was there, which is, again, aggregating marketing data, transactional data into one place, helping you analyze it. And that's when, long story short, I decided, hey, there's a really interesting scalable business if you make the right decisions with data. Let me go now figure out, can I actually maybe buy a lot of these businesses together? And so I started an aggregator with a few other brand founders in the space during the time when the Amazon FBA wave was going on in 2021, 2022 with Thrasio. And we got backed by the same investors at Thrasio to go do that in D2C. We thought D2C businesses are longer lasting than Amazon businesses for a lot of reasons. And then long story short on that, about 8 months in, decided to give investor money back because we did not think it was a scalable strategy. We just didn't really see a lot of profitable businesses out there that were able to scale, in a dramatic way. And we didn't see a lot of synergies between those, D2C businesses, which was our thesis coming in. So of course, we can dive into that a little more. But that did lead me to my next two companies. But I'll pause there because that was a lot to take in. But really, data has been like a central part of all those decisions and how I think about, the different opportunities that I've had so far the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, what an awesome background. And there's I think one thing that really stands out to me is your time as an operator, right? A lot of people one problem that I see with a lot of people who understand data analytics, best practices, data warehousing, ETL, like how to build the right infrastructure, they lack the hands-on experience of being an operator. And so they're actually very far removed from the actual operator who's the end user of the data, right? And so when you and I first met, that was something that I was very impressed with, of just here's a guy who's seeking to really leverage these tools and understand them, but he's an operator, right? And so one follow-up question I have, and maybe there's probably going to be a few here on the aggregator front. You mentioned prior to deciding to shut down the aggregator and return the investor money, you made this determination that you weren't finding a lot of brands that were able to scale profitably. What were you seeing in the economics of the brands that caused you to go, no, we can't scale these profitably?
It's a great question. And there's a few things. So for one, also there's a lot of opportunity in these brands, just to be clear. I mean, there's a lot of inefficiency in these brands, especially in the marketing side. which we can go into. But what I did see is, for one, we were coming out of COVID, or kind of we were in peak COVID coming out of, and what was happening was, for one, supply chain rates were going up dramatically, container rates and everything.
For sure.
And so back to the unit economics changed of these businesses. And the challenge with that is, yes, maybe your COGS went up, but it's hard to then also change your pricing to, offset that.
Yep.
And so a lot of these brands, weren't able to raise prices that dramatically. And one day to the next, your margins are kind of worse. So that's a big thing. The other thing was just thinking about like the marketing space in general. It was getting more competitive to actually market as well in this time. And so, CPMs, other thing, were going up. So acquisition was even harder. Again, your cost per acquisition goes up, economics get a little worse. That's a little more difficult for you to buy a business. And then I would say the harder parts were figuring out the people side of it as well, which was, in the end, like one of the core theses, I think, of buying a business like this is that you don't have to have a lot of people to actually help manage it. And when you take out the founder, for instance, that's actually really hard to do because the founder actually is doing a lot of things across the business. You don't even realize that. And so just you have to add in more people than you actually realize to kind of own certain different domains in the business. And so the people cost was even pretty high. So it was the COGS, supply chain costs. It was both the acquisition costs with marketing, which are two kind of the biggest line items. And then the people is the third biggest probably in this area. And those were getting all hit, so totally. And then the last thing about buying businesses is the expectations of the owners of their value of their own business was actually really high in this period because they came off this amazing demand cycle with a lot of organic demand. So everything looked better. And they were saying, well, look at my business, what it was before. But you saw these businesses start to kind of recede, down to the baseline back they were before. But owners didn't want to think like that. They want to say, hey, it's always going to be like this forever. So expectations were also just pretty off in general. And I said the last point, but the very, very last point is why these models were very challenged is that the capital structure is also really difficult for a lot of these businesses where there's a lot of working capital. You have to basically fund inventory, fund marketing, and eventually get a return on that. So as those times for inventory expanded because the shipping rates and container, it took 6 months to get some goods, or to order a lot in advance, you hold it in your warehouse. That's a big drain on your cash. And then all of a sudden you see people, that they're funding these aggregators are funding with debt. And so you have to pay interest on the debt, and that it's very expensive. And so all of a sudden you have a mismatch between you have to pay interest on debt today, but then you get future potentially returns tomorrow or way out there. You have a big gap in like how much you actually can fund these aggregators. And so we're just, that's why these aggregators had to raise so much money, just to even get to the point they were at a certain scale, and they're still not profitable.
For sure. They had to plug that gap between the return and the debt service.
Exactly.
It's interesting. I was the COO and CFO of Guardian Bikes during this time, and I was actually, I had been at Guardian / SureStop either part-time or full-time for quite a while, and I was getting the itch to go do my own thing, and I was going to do it a year earlier, but going into the beginning of 2021, all these dynamics you're talking about in the market were happening, were hitting us as a fast-growing D2C brand and an outdoor product, which was like took off even more than many other product categories in e-com during COVID. And so I actually had to stay around for a whole year just to get us, being the COO and CFO, the one who understood the dynamics of all those things you just talked about. Return on marketing spend, inventory, how costs were going up all over the place. I mean, supplier costs beyond freight forwarding was going up left and right. Oh, the cost of aluminum just went up. Oh, the cost of steel just went up. POs that were already cut and accepted, and before they got shipped, the factory going, dude, the cost of steel has gone up considerably since we accepted this order. We have to charge you more, and we weren't expecting that, right? And it was insane. And we were. Me and the CEO Brian Riley, we split, we kind of divide and conquer. I kind of ran the company as interim CEO basically for a year while he went out and equity fundraise, and I focused on getting a brand new fresh piece of debt capital in the business to fund those daily working capital needs. And we did a little bit of a round, got that multi-million-dollar line of credit in place, and then I was like, okay, now we're stable enough coming out of 2021 for me to replace myself with a CFO and kind of make the move. But like, it was a very crazy time. I mean, there's probably a whole podcast episode just telling the war story. Seriously, like from that time period.
It just goes to show, you could be an incredibly fast growing company, but all of a sudden you need money, right? And so that's the obviously value that you guys provide also in terms of being the CFO suite and strategic CFOs. That's usually like the missing link. I've seen in a lot of these companies as well, is that where there's so much opportunity, ones that we're trying to buy, because they weren't looking strategically at how can they unlock their business
for sure
with smarter financial decisions, with better capital structure, with more funding. Because usually why these businesses were so interesting is that a lot of them are just underfunded. They don't have capital to go out and buy inventory or make marketing decisions that are more experiments or bets, or even expand to a new market like Amazon, that does require a little more handholding. And that's what we did. We actually found that pretty successful, is we would actually try to, bring DTC brands to Amazon. And it does take a little bit of like initial, kind of working capital. It takes a little time, but it was actually really efficient for a lot of brands that already had like this latent demand that and this goes to attribution, by the way. You have latent demand that you're pushing out there from Meta and TikTok and all these other channels, and Amazon is like a brand search, kind of
sure
haven. And so if you're not capturing that demand, all of a sudden, like, you're just losing money, like you're leaving it on the table. And so we look for those opportunities a lot when we're looking for acquisitions of who's actually driving a lot in D2C, but has a really good opportunity on Amazon to push demand as well.
It's funny that you mentioned this. So once a month I batch our podcast recordings. I was talking to Jeff, my partner, Jeff Lowenstein, who's a mutual friend of Will and I's, and actually Will's the one who introduced me to him. We were talking about Amazon and talking about like how to expand from D2C to Amazon, and that, like, I have several clients that I work with who have very heavy top of funnel spend and didn't have Amazon on at the beginning. And when they just simply turned it on, even FBM, not even have the Prime badge or anything like that, just drawing off that same 3PL inventory, right? Their blended marketing efficiency very clearly went up. And so what that told us is there's people seeing those ads that wouldn't buy on the Shopify store for some reason. Not to mention that there's probably also net new customers who didn't even see the ad on, top of funnel, at one of the top of funnel channels, who are going and buying the product. And so like it's thinking about, well, so this actually segues nicely into some of the attribution stuff I want to talk about here, is that, like, because Prescient and Free to Grow have a couple of mutual clients, and like I think one of the things that both of the mutual clients we have struggled with at times is like thinking about the attribution of their two different e-commerce channels, Amazon and their website, because in reality, top of funnel spend benefits all, right? That's one big hot topic on the attribution front. But then there's also just this general kind of like attribution mindset, like I kind of preface at the beginning of the episode, is like, you tend to find, this is a generalization, but like it rings fairly true. You either find a founder who's like, attribution's dead, iOS 14 screwed everything up, what can we do? Or ones who are like, they're really trying to seek like, what's the next level of sophistication here? Is it a tech product? Is it a mindset shift? Is it what is it? It's a little bit, in my opinion, it's a little bit of both. It's a mindset shift and looking at what tech is available out there. But we talk about this new way of thinking through attribution, both tools and mindset. What are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, obviously a very deep topic, and back to like why I'm even at Prescient, and my journey is that I've only looked for companies that have solved problems that I've wanted to solve myself or wanted to solve as an operator. It was the same thing with Source Media when I was there, in terms of solving kind of a problem, aggregating data. And I met Prescient as a partner of Source Media, because I was looking for who can activate this data, who can actually use the data we collect to actually help to make decisions. And this goes back to the fundamental view of like, what is attribution? And I think it's funny, like, I think attribution even is like not even the best word to think about this stuff. It's how do you measure the efficiency of what you're doing at all times? So like measurement is like what I've come to understand is like, what are the measurement solutions for you? And you could measure, yourself by saying, hey, the blended returns on your business. You said blended efficiency, that's a measurement. That's like a form of measurement, blended returns across channels. Another form of measurement that's become very popular pre-iOS 14 was multi-touch attribution, MTA, which means, hey, what can I understand the purchase journey from me as a user across different touch points and eventually to the purchase. And that's what's been really challenged by this iOS 14 issues, because
For sure.
you can't really track the journey as well as you did before. And that's where, like the North Beams and Triple Whales, they did a really good job of creating a market around this, but have now, seen the light of a different form of measurement coming around, which is marketing mix modeling, which is, I heard about marketing mix modeling, MMM, 2 years ago, and I got really interested in why I got interested in the first place is that this really comes down to like, how do you track different data points? And back to the point of the MTA, you track it based on clicks, based on a pixel, based on you put on your site. You can actually then track the user journey. As we know, it gets more challenging with market mix modeling. It's more about taking first party data. And so it's just data you've actually collected already. Let's say transactional data that lives within Shopify or an Amazon. A purchase has happened in a day. That's transactional data. Then you have your marketing data, which is spend, how many impressions you get, potentially how many clicks you get as well. And it's really all it is looking for the statistical relationship between those inputs, i.e., let's say spend, and then revenue on the day. It's a statistical model saying you spent on this day and you likely then got a return. And this is likely where that return came from based on the model that we've constructed. So why I really like that concept is that it's future proof. It's something where you're always going to be collecting data from these platforms, and you don't need pixels in order to do this type of math. And again, it's pretty much math in the end. And so that's where, coming back to the question about attribution and why it's changed and what's different, is that the fundamental problem is the same. You want to basically understand what's my effectiveness of my ad dollars, but the method of data collection is different. The method of how you actually think about that analysis is different. And then what's also different about today's marketing mix models is they're a lot faster than they used to be. And they used to be, this is a 1950s, 1960s technology that used to be used for billboards and radio and everything else used to be offline kind of spend. Now it's being used because data is more accessible. We could run, at least at Prescient, we run these models daily. Usually it's, for other players, it's maybe weekly, monthly, quarterly. And it's a very dynamic way to market. And we could talk about it more, but top of funnel is kind of the bread and butter for this type of thing, because
Totally.
the relationship between top of funnel, i.e. like impressions being served and eventually to revenue, is actually very strong if you can actually measure that. And that's a big reason why I got super interested in this, is that the effectiveness of your top of funnel spend has just not been measured, I think, in an effective way up until this point in time.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Man, there's like several different ways that we can go with this. I think first off, what are some of the mistakes when a brand comes to Prescient, right? What are some of the common kind of like mistakes that you're seeing about like how they are thinking about their attribution or the expectations of attribution at that time?
Yeah, I would say there's not like real mistakes. I think it's just learning and education. And in the end, like we often say, like we're not the one size fits all solution. We're not the source of truth in the end. And I think that's a mistake. Looking for like the one size fits all solution,
sure.
that's going to be what you use in entirety. And it's different situations where you should be using different tools and different methods, but also like you should trust your own, like you're the marketer in the end, you know your business better than anyone else. You know the levers you need to pull. So if something looks wrong, and that's what I've seen the best marketers do, is that something intuitively looks wrong, use it as a way to question and say, what else can I use to basically help me understand whether I'm wrong, potentially I should look at things differently, or something is wrong with this model or this measurement, or maybe the data coming in is not, is a little funky, because these are only good as the data coming in. You have to remember that as well. I'd say that the biggest opportunities are, I see a lot of people coming in with last click as like kind of their sweet spot, their comfort zone, which is been very challenged by the switch to GA4, for instance, where people are so used to this last click mentality, and they might see high return on brand spend. I still see this to this very day. It's when I started, like my agency was pushing brand spend constantly, and not all brand spend is bad, by the way. So I want to also say that some brand spend is good to keep yourself top of the listing. It can still soak up some demand, but oftentimes it's usually one of the biggest, like most inefficient buckets, right, that you're spending in. but it feels comfortable because your returns look high. So
Yeah.
the thing I see is, relying on that as the sole form of measurement versus just one of those forms of measurement to say, yeah, my intuition tells me that Google brand search or Amazon even ads is basically soaking up credit. Where do I think the actual credit should be attributed to? And that's where you start answering or asking questions and then start using other tools to say, well, what can actually help me measure my top of funnel more effectively or not? Is it incrementality test, which is good?
Yep.
Is it something like a market mix model? Great. Is it my blend of returns? As I spend more my meta ads, I see my blend of returns still staying pretty flat or coming down a little bit. That's also a form of measurement because intuitively for some brands that are even smaller, you don't need a marketing mix model to tell you that if you only have Meta and Google as like your channels, let's say.
Yeah, so that makes me think of how I kind of set this up with the two of the mutual clients we have. Like, they both have tried to seek to understand more about the top of funnel impact, the top of funnel spend impact on both their Shopify store and their Amazon store, right? Because they have both, and both of them have at times asked me like, "Hey, John, it like kind of like feels like we're spending on Amazon for no reason right now, and that really it's all coming from our top of funnel. Like, what are some ways or tips that brands can think about, like if they're really driving a lot of awareness with their top of funnel spend, how to think about how Amazon versus Shopify might be ultimately contributing to the effectiveness of that top of funnel spend?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I wanted to solve for, when I was an operator, and it's honestly what like Prescient does this really well. Not selling my own book too much, but it's like we measure the relationship between top of funnel spend off of Amazon on Amazon, which has been great for a lot of operators because again, back to intuition, some people actually have run. I've seen spreadsheets from brands that I've worked with where they've run their own correlation analysis, saying as we've increased spend, I'm on let's say Meta, I'm seeing a lift in
Mm-hmm.
my Amazon sales as well. So that's like a nice little gut check. But then we actually have a model that does statistically, say that, hey, spend and impressions increased on Meta, TikTok, and everything on more view-based channels, and is actually showing an rise, and then we're redistributing credit away from Amazon ads as well, so that you actually are actually right, let's say, about that scenario. But what I've seen so far across clients mostly is that you get to a point where if you do have more like view-based channels, if you do have more top of funnel spend, and you do have somewhat of a brand, you're always going to get leakage on Amazon. And one of
Yeah,
the ways you're also going to look for that is you could just do like a jungle scout search as well. Look for who are searching for your brand,
for
on
sure.
Amazon as well. And that's another big thing you can do if you're not Amazon today and you think you're right for it. But yeah, I do think these marketing mix models do a really good job at least giving you some comfort around some of those numbers.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because there's another brand that I work with that has been spending really heavily on Meta for a couple of years, and before they got Amazon fired up, like about at the beginning of this year, they did some search term kind of like research on Amazon, and it was very clear that people were searching their product left and right, and they didn't have the product available on Amazon, and so they were going and buying similar devices from other
Mm.
brands, quite likely, right? And it, the thesis was, well, yeah, we've been spending on Meta for a couple of years very aggressively. Like, of course, people are going on Amazon and looking. Then when they turned Amazon on a few months ago, I mean, their blended MER across the business skyrocketed, like even more than they thought it would, and
Absolutely.
it's really important for brands to understand the connection between the channels. Like that's one thing that is, I don't know, I could be wrong. I'd love to get your take on this, but like I don't personally know a ton about media mix modeling yet. I know some because some of the brands I work with have exposure to it. It's something that I want to seek to understand it at a much deeper level. But like, I think it sounds like, from my understanding, one advantage of it is it pays homage to the connection between channels. Whereas like when you look at the other kind of like click based, it very much makes it feel like the channels are separate, right? And like they're almost competing against each other. But the reality is, like marketing 101, it's all connected. All of it's connected, right? And so uh like it sounds like this new way of modeling again, it pays respect to the fact that it's connected. Do you agree? And how can you riff
Yeah,
on that a little bit
you can
more?
join the marketing team if you want. I mean, that's like a perfect, that's like very well said. I mean, that is the challenge, is that it's very siloed. Pixels are siloed based on like D2C heavy. Like if you're a very D2C heavy business, again, like extremely D2C heavy, and you're only advertising on more like these click-based channels, it could be still a good tool for you to use because they're daily, they're updating daily. It's very dynamic as well. So I wouldn't shy away from still trying to use it as one of your like quivers that you have. But yeah, I
Hmm.
agree with you. Relying on it too heavily is going to be challenging. And also the cool thing about marketing mix models, and Prescient doesn't use today, but we're going to be getting to in the future, is we're going to be bringing in retail channels and other channels that also have an impact. So it's not even just your online channels. Your retail is going to be impacted by your media
Totally.
spend.
Totally.
And for a lot of CPG brands, especially out there where retail is a much bigger component, but they still want to drive, off on shelf velocity. They want to drive velocity for their retailers, for everyone else. And so that's going to be really effective, is how do you use a Meta or anything else like that, or CTV or other channels to basically drive retail?
Hmm.
That's pretty huge. And that's what
Totally.
I'm most excited about, is like this pure omni-channel view of like everything's just symbiotic. In the end, the customer is going to shop where they want to shop, but you want to drive them, and you might want to even drive them geographically and region, everything else like that. There's a lot of targeting you can do online that you can't really do in store, which makes it a very effective channel for that.
Yeah, that's actually really timely that you brought that up, because I've been talking with a couple of guests on the show for the last couple of weeks about expanding into retail. And like the thing is, and actually, I can't take credit for this. This comes from my buddy Ryan Rouse, also a mutual
Mhm.
friend of ours. He says, like, look, dude, if you want your brand to hit a certain size, generally speaking, 50 plus million a year in revenue, you have to expand outside of D2C. There are very few brands who can do 50 plus million D2C only, right? And so certainly there's Amazon, but let's just say to do 50 plus million, you quite likely need to expand beyond e-commerce, right? And I'm saying that because, like, one, there's nothing wrong with building a profitable brand that does less than 50 million and staying D2C. That is great and awesome, especially if you've got like this really kind of narrow niche and you just crush it D2C. But if you've got aspirations to grow 50 plus million, retail probably inevitably is a must at some point, right? It just
Mhm.
it's there's only so much TAM D2C and only so much TAM on Amazon. And so, like Will just said, you have to meet your customers where they are. But here's a beautiful kind of advantage of being a D2C first brand. If you're crushing it top of funnel, you can drive traffic and sales in these brick and mortar retail locations, right? And so, like, when I think about I think about the early days of e-com. I was talking about this with one of the guests in our retail conversation like a couple weeks ago. Like, early days of e-com, when you were just like the first brand to sell that product on e-com, it felt like, or at least there were stories, maybe they weren't all true, but it felt like you could get to 50 million a lot easier D2C only, right? Today, all the competition online, like, you're going to go retail. And the reason why that's important to understand is because, like, you actually can drive some of that demand in a way that, like, a retail first brand really can't, right? And so I think the future, I think the 7, 8, 9 years ago, you could build a 9-figure brand D2C like much easier. But today, the 9-figure brand that started D2C is Omni-Channel, like, bottom line. And
Yeah.
so when you talk about the marketing measurement of becoming a 9-figure brand, it sounds like marketing mix modeling, like, is a must, because, like, you or like, one, you need to understand how you can drive sales in these new channels that you open up. But it's like it's a strategic lever. Like, how do you use the analogy of a quiver? Like, how do you, like, really load up your D2C marketing prowess and use it to crush it in retail? And so,
Yeah.
like, I'm seeing more
Yeah.
and more that, like, if you want to build a big brand, I'm talking about retail and Amazon, and talking with guys like Will right now, because, like, you've got to think about your big digitally native brand as being omni-channel, and you got to think about it today before you're 50 million, because you don't want to get there and figure it out.
Yeah. There's so much to that, and I totally agree with that. All those things you said. But I think what's also really important is that you need to be comfortable with your budget and how do you scale your budget, which
For
is
sure.
really important when you're going omni-channel and something that like marketing mix modeling, it's not just getting numbers and saying, here's your ROAS, right? It's actually optimization as well, which is if I have a budget, how do I allocate it in the right manner? We have an automatic optimization tool that will allocate your budget based on saturation points of your
Mm,
campaigns. And so, where should I be pulling back and spending more on? And once you feel confident that you're getting your highest return, let's say on a campaign and your economics are good, like your economics are good, then you start scaling. And that's what we've seen with the best brands out there is that you get comfortable with your base, you get really strong, you start scaling from there. And then because also retail economics are not going to be better. Like typically, like
for
they're
sure.
going to be a lower margin product. However, you get more scale as a result of that. So that's why it's really important to understand your own product and understand like how can you acquire customers? What is your margins on your product? The gross margins on your product? How is that going to be different in retail versus online? And that's going to then help you how to think about directing strategy. And I think the last point, the data point on this is that like I've seen a lot of these brands that expand to retail, they're doing like impression, brand frequency and reach campaigns, like really more top of funnel stuff. And that might not look good for your ecom business if you're
Mhm.
kind of putting it all together, blending those stats together, because that's not going to have an online return for you. But that's why you need a whole view of the business, because if you're just looking at that and saying, I shouldn't spend on these campaigns because it's not having direct impact on my sales today, that's when you get challenged. If you don't feel confident about that relationship between spending that online spend on top of funnel and
Yeah,
actually getting a longer term return, let's say in retail, which is going to be really important for your growth later on.
for sure, for sure. Another thing that is not necessarily tied to this conversation about like attribution and or like marketing or the media mix modeling. Sorry, some people I talk to call it media mix modeling.
It's
Some people call it
I don't
marketing.
know. I think my marketing team told me I had to call it marketing mix modeling, but I was calling media mix modeling, but
Yeah, I've
it's
heard that.
interchangeable.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like I was talking to someone, I was on someone's podcast last week and he's like, "Do you call it MER or MER?" He's like, "I call it MER." I'm like, oh,
I
you call
call
it
it I
whatever you
call it
want.
marketing is a percentage of sales. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Market, yeah. The COO, I think he's the president now over at Nectar Mattress. He calls it marketing cost of sales, and I actually he
Mm.
was an advisor to us at Guardian, and I kind of latched onto that because it made sense to me. Marketing cost of sales and as a percentage of
Yeah,
revenue,
definitely.
Um, but what I was gonna say is that we talk a lot as fractional CFOs for D2C brands about like connecting contribution margin dollars back to the efficiency of your marketing, right? And like one thing that we are starting to see with brand founders is, as I'm sure you see over at Prescient, is that like we understand certain concepts, and same thing with you guys over there, and like your tools do some math that like your the operator doesn't need to understand that stuff like in the weeds, but they have to have like a somewhat of an understanding of like how these drivers are interconnected and produce certain outcomes. But the implementation for us of like understanding the connection between marketing efficiency and contribution margin dollars, we understand it really well, but implementing that with the operators, we're really learning how to do that better and better and better. And one thing that we're finding is the partnership or lack thereof between the operator and like say the founder and whoever's actually doing the media buying, right? Whether it's an outside agency
Mm.
or it's someone in house, and getting them to use your advice and your tool to produce the outcomes that are best for the business. You might have the operator who understands one thing and the ad buyer understands a different thing, right? And really you can't have one without the other or you're going to run into issues. You're ultimately not going to have an outcome that aligns with like expectations. One thing we have shifted to or starting to shift to internally is to say that like, hey, we want you to understand that there is a range of marketing efficiencies that get to the same contribution margin dollars because the plug is scale, right? How much can you scale your ad spend? And what we found is that when you give an ad buyer just one marketing efficiency metric to stay within, when they inevitably are not, they're scaling ad spend and that they start falling below that, they freeze, generally speaking. And they may not realize that if they were tooled up with knowing that, like, hey, even though marketing efficiency has dropped, you're on the path to scale enough that it's actually going to produce more profitability for the business. And so we're moving to this kind of sensitivity analysis type of like model where we give a table to the brand and the ad buyer and say, look up the marketing efficiency that you think you're going to hit, and then look up the ad spend that you need to spend at that efficiency to hit the margin dollar goal that we have for the month. What are your thoughts on thinking about, really, I'm sounding this in the marketplace. Stop setting one target and just holding yourself to it. You need to set a guardrail, but know the different scenarios that lead to the same outcome, bottom line. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that approach. I do think it's challenging when people have one goal in mind, like one number in mind. And I agree with you. Scale is the most important part. And it's like, also, what do you want to do? Like, what is your strategy for the next period of time? Like, is it to become profitable, or is it to grow top line, or is it to become efficient? So it's all these different things where you do need, I think, really good people that provide that advice. I think the point that you made is, how do you connect like a metric to the end goal, which is, let's say, revenue or profit, and like showing the connection between the two, I think is really what will help in the end, because all these numbers don't mean anything, And that's what I think. Like, a lot of these numbers, brands, this and that, don't mean anything if ROAS is not your target. If it's LTV, if it's like long-term value to the customer, you can then
For sure.
long-term view. So that's why I think it's a little challenging. Back to the point about communicating with the CEO of the founders, I still think the most challenging thing in this space is there's too many acronyms. Like, day
For sure.
one I came in, too many acronyms. MER is an acronym that shouldn't, to be honest, be around. Like, it's the inverse of a finance term. Marketing is percentage of sales, as we just said. And
For sure.
it would be a lot simpler if we just kind of set it out there versus like abbreviating it. But I think there's a lot of, that's what I've seen in the space, a lot of ways to obscure information versus just being very simple and direct. If you gave a grid, exactly what you're saying, and that's what your bottom line is going to look like. That's how much cash you're going to have in your bank, at the end of the month if you get this strategy. And I think people probably should do more like retroactive analysis and say, what did I fall in, based on these metrics? Were they the right metrics to measure, initially to get to my outcome or not? And that's what I've seen, again, in talking to the best operators that I've seen on my own podcast that I've been doing. They are so outcome driven versus KPI driven, if that makes sense. And then the KPIs are very flexible based on what the outcome looks like to them.
Totally. Well, I mean, the whole point of a good KPI, of a good set of KPIs, is it's a mixture of leading indicators and lagging indicators, and the leading indicators should have a cause and effect relationship to the lagging indicator outcomes that you're trying to drive, right? And so that's what you hit the nail on the head from my perspective, which is like, we're not just trying to like measure these empty metrics. We're trying to say, if these metrics are showing up throughout the month, here's what you expect by the end of the month, right? But understand that, like, rule number one of setting a forecast is you're not going to hit that forecast. So like, I'm really becoming I'm more and more bearish on saying, like, when an ad buyer is like, hey, what should I spend and what should my return be? I'm like, well, listen, we can set a direction because, like, yeah, inevitably when you're trying to scale spend, you do have an endpoint that you're trying to get to. So like, I'm fine with us setting a direction, but you've got to be tooled up with scenarios, because we are not going to hit that single point. We're not going to hit that single combination of return on ad spend or MER or whatever you want to use. We're not going to hit that single point of revenue and ad spend. We're not. So it's okay to set up the month to try to get there, but when we inevitably end of week 1, week 2, week 3 are not on track for that, we want to tool you up to know where could you end up? Could you still hit your goal, your bottom line goal, if scale ends up being different, right? You want to give them levers, because what I just see, unfortunately, especially in the agency world, but I mean, in-house ad buyers are plenty guilty of this as well, is like, I mean, and dude, to their credit, I have empathy for this. They've been beat up so often by brand founders getting to the end of the month, and the ROAS or the MER or whatever was way off, and like, the brand founder's like, what the heck are you guys doing? Why did you do this? This was the goal. And oftentimes, if they went one layer deeper and looked at what contribution margin dollars ended up actually being, you might find sometimes, not always, but sometimes the ad buyer actually did something better for the bottom line. Or maybe they didn't, but no one is able to bring the continuity between revenue, ad spend, and bottom line profit dollars. And that's what we're really seeking to do a lot of times. Like, we're helping with other areas in the P&L, but we work with profit focused scaling D2C brands. So what are we talking about a lot? Revenue, ad spend, bottom line. How are they all connected? And like, that communication is so key.
Yeah, and that's what I love about Free to Grow and kind of what you're doing, which is if you stay at the top line KPI metric, then you're not getting to the outcome in the end. And the KPI, as you said, is just meant to be like an indicator for you to understand how to actually evaluate your business. And it comes back to measurement, which is how are you even measuring ROAS? How are you measuring these different things if you're not measuring it in a way that's effective anymore? Maybe you were using a pre-iOS MTA, kind of tool, and if you're still using that number, you're driving the wrong way at this point, like in my opinion. And you might feel comfortable with that. Same thing with last click. It's a comfort thing in the end, but it's not necessarily going to drive the results you need. So that's what's been really challenging. And what I would say for those people that are actually doing that, it's, again, you're not doing things wrong. It's just maybe open to trying things differently. Look for ways to expand like your education around these different tools that are out there, and then use the tool that's best for you in your situation.
For sure.
Not every tool is going to work. And I think that's always what I say about the other tools when I evaluate them in the space, is even our own tools, like ask the right questions, get confidence before you make a decision, and don't necessarily just listen to everyone else in the space, saying this is the best next thing. Do your own research, in the end, and make sure you're making the best decision for your own brand.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best advice, I keep talking about our buddy Ryan Rouse because he's got a lot of wisdom, but like he is a guy that I really look up to in terms of going like, hey, you don't have to be like every other brand out there. Like, figure out what metrics are your North Star, right? And define that, and make sure everyone on your leadership team is aligned that those metrics are our North Star, and make sure they're all using the same definition. If they're using the definition of MER for ROAS, you know what, whatever, I'm not going to beat you up on that, but just have the same
revenue,
definition.
Gross revenue,
yeah,
like
whatever, exactly. Find your definition, align on it, and then you're good. Who cares if other people call it something different? We call some things different at Free to Grow, but we're aligned on what it means. And we're aligned, like Will said, on the connection to the outcome that you're trying to drive. That's what's most important. Because at the end of the day, why'd you start a business? You started a business to change the outcomes in your life, one way or another, right? So like, that's what we're all here to try to help generate. So
benchmarking only gets you too far. I think in the end, benchmarking can also lead you into like kind of the wrong direction if you're not benchmarking against, again, like no two companies are exactly the same. So that's where also I see some caution is, be aware of benchmarking. Again, it's useful as a way to think about, maybe triangulating some answers, but just be wary that not every business is the same. And so benchmarking is going to look very different across the board.
100%. Well, I feel like we could chat for, the rest of this year, you and I on episodes here. But I'm going to have to cut us here. We're going to land the plane. Before we end, I always like to ask a personal question. And so just want to ask you, like, in this season of life on the personal side of the house, what's something that you're really loving these days?
Well, I'm going to be loving, hopefully, my first kid coming, in a few weeks. So that's been a nice way to prepare. But, I love that fact. My wife has just been incredible, throughout this whole kind of journey so far. And I just appreciate like having some personal life, and especially even like in the career sense, in my current job at Prescient, like they're very family first, family focused, and I've really appreciated that, which is just like make time and carve out time for what you need to do personally. So that and a bunch of the sci-fi books I've been reading, it takes
Awesome.
my mind off all this other stuff that I'm doing across the board.
Dude, I love that. Well, congrats to you and your wife. I'm super excited for you. As you know, with my three little kids, it's there's no greater journey than being an entrepreneur and a parent at the same time. It's like they're both very entrepreneurial in their own right, for sure. And I know you guys are going to crush it. Really quick, where can people find more info on Prescient and on you?
Yeah, starting with Prescient, it's very hard to find us because our website domain is not great. Hopefully, going to change it at some point. But Prescient-AI.io is the website. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so I do post thoughts from here and there, and do have a podcast called Don't VLOOKUP with friends across the space. So hopefully, that's also for data-driven, operators out in the space as well. We do talk a lot about a lot of the concepts that Jon talks about. But no, I appreciate you, Jon, for having me on. It's been a fun one.
Absolutely. Don't VLOOKUP. You have to check it out. I mean, one of the best podcast names of 2024 for sure. I love it. When I saw you guys launch it, I was like, yes. I mean, being an Excel power user myself, I was like, this is amazing.
Exactly. There you go.
But thanks for joining, Will. Definitely check Will out on LinkedIn. And look, if you want other helpful tips on scaling a D2C brand, consider following me, Jon Blair, on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in learning more about how Free2Grow's e-commerce accountants and fractional CFOs can help your brand scale alongside healthy profit, cash flow, and confidence, then check us out at free2growcfo.com. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. And until next time, scale on.